So Dr. Strangelove's new passion is what this is about. Instead of nuclear war, it has something to do with precision-guided missiles. So I entitled this Dr. Strangelove's new passion, precision-guided mayhem. I gave there's an article, which some of you may have read, that I wrote for a journal that just started that I'm a contributing editor to. And they interviewed me, I think it was about less than a week ago, for about an hour. You can see the video, and there's some interesting people actually asking me questions. But in any case, that's this presentation. So with no further ado, why don't we get into it? And I suppose before we begin to the first slide, I suppose the one takeaway for tonight's presentation, if there was only one thing I could convey, that it would the one idea I'd want to convey the most is that with very accurate missiles and drones, you can kill a nation in just as effectively as nuclear weapons, but in with very different effects. And we're not quite clear on that point yet. We're backing into our understanding or our brief about that. And it has enormous consequences if I'm right. I might be wrong, but I kind of think I'm not. But imagine nuclear weapons being made somewhat obsolete by precision guidance. That's what we're going to explore, that possibility, how that could be. All right, so why don't we begin? First slide. All right. Strategic bombing is a phrase that covers bombing activities by airplanes as early as the First World War, but definitely in the Second World War. And the concepts behind strategic bombing were basically this, that if you hit important political, military, and economic centers early in the war, you can spook the other side into surrendering and cut short the bloodshed. So you have to be barbaric if you want to be civilized about war. You have to be willing to murder lots of people, destroy a lot of property quickly to at least end the war in a very short period of time. Because if you don't, the war will linger and much more destruction will go on. And it's not humane. So this culminated in the early 40s with a decision to bomb cities. Now, that theory certainly supported that. Technology at the time was such that it was very hard for a plane to drop a bomb within 75 square miles of its intended target. And so technology conspired with this rather bizarre theory of strategic bombing that, killing large numbers of people and destroying lots of civilian assets early in the war was a smart thing to do. The technology, or I should say the lack of accuracy, conspired with this theory to produce this picture. Well, what is this? This is Nagasaki. The bombing of Nagasaki actually killed fewer people than the conventional firebombing of Tokyo. They were very similar. If you looked at the two pictures, you'd be hard pressed to know which was which. So the early days of strategic bombing, from like 1917, certainly through the 60s, 1960s, were designed to be massively indiscriminate and things that would kill a lot of people on their way to destroying what they called military industrial complexes, major communication centers. It's code for hitting a city. And that's what strategic bombing was in the early days. And they were indiscriminate, not only in what they harmed, but in their ability to target anything, because things were very inaccurate. Okay, next slide. Here's where we are today. It's a little different. This is something, a picture of a car that we hit with something called the Flying Jinsu, which is a hellfire that doesn't even have an explosive warhead. We knew who was in that back seat. It was a terrorist. We knew precisely where he was. We knew precisely how to get a piece of metal, essentially, to hit that. There was no explosion. It was a kinetic kill. The driver walked away in the front seat. Essentially, we learned since the mid 40s or early 40s how to aim not within 75 square miles, but within a yard, 1 square yard of our intended target. And we were therefore, able to smugly say that we would be able to hit who we wanted and avoid hitting who we didn't want to hit. And it was thought that precision like this would civilize war, because you wouldn't hurt innocent people. The person on the motorcycle also walked away. He wasn't who we wanted to get. So that seems like a pretty good story. Progress. Next slide. These precision missiles, cruise and ballistic, are not unique to the United States anymore. They used to be, but that was 30 or more years ago. Now, China, India, South Korea, North Korea, Israel, Iran, you can read the list. I don't have to read it for you. All God's children have missiles now that go several hundred kilometers and can hit the target within roughly 10 meters. That's about 30 feet. I don't think, Brooke, we didn't add any video of one of these missiles in the additional slides, did we?
In the additional slides, I think so. I'd have
to. Yeah,
why
don't you show? Yeah, well, tell me when you're ready to upload. How long do you think that?
I mean, I just need to find it.
Okay, well, just go to the end, and I can vector you in.
This one or
that one? Just show them that. No, the one before. One before. There you go. Run either of them. It doesn't matter which. The first one you'll see is Hebrew. This is an Israeli rocket sold to Azerbaijan, it turns out, called the Laura. And here it's being launched at sea. At one point, it was moving, and it's being fired, and there it goes. This is capable of 400 kilometers range, and there's the target. Well, it's gone now. So, you'll notice there isn't even necessary a large explosion to hit the target. We're so precise. Okay, so let's go back now to the slides. It's too bad the punchline was his picture. That's Dr. Strangelove. Okay, go to the next slide. Now, you've heard a lot about drones. These now are spreading as well. We designed and did a lot of work on these 20 years ago in a big way. now that technology is being produced in Turkey, Iran, China. That particular picture is of a system sold to Nigeria, North Korea, and then, of course, you can get them commercially. That one we're seeing is carrying a 250-pound payload. That's a lot. If if that was high explosive, that would be quite a lot of damage. And then my favorite, the drones you can get on Amazon, which go up to like payloads of, I don't know, 50 pounds. These things fly 60 miles an hour or more, and can fly so close to the ground that no radar I know would know of its arrival. Okay. Now, these are spreading, and we are somewhere now where I think people were right before World War I, where the United States had some experience with machine guns, and the British did, and we weren't quite clear on what it would be like if the other side had them. Well, it turned out that was just awful. It was World War I, trench warfare, lots of people getting killed, mowed down on both sides. We are approaching a situation where weak states, not just big modern states, are going to have and do have accurate missiles and drones. Next slide. Well, we got a taste of what this might mean not that long ago. Does anybody remember reading about this attack on this facility in Saudi Arabia called Abqaiq? 5% of the world's oil capacity was knocked out. And take a look at the holes. They're precisely, no pun intended, in the exact same location 4 times. Israeli military analysts looked at this and estimated that the CEP was 1 meter. That is about 3 feet. Now, CEP is a fancy word or phrase. It refers to circle of error probable. And it's a way of measuring accuracy. And it is, CEP actually is the radius of a circle closest, that defines where 50% of your bombs or missiles fall closest to your intended target. It's a little sophisticated, but roughly 1 meter CEP means over half of whatever you shoot is going to fall within 3 feet of your intended target, roughly. I'm taking a few liberties, but not many. These missiles went past 3 layers of air defense and missile defense. It isn't just the Saudis who were caught flat-footed, in a sense. NATO analysts looked at this and swallowed hard, because the sophistication of the Saudi air defense system was no less than that of most NATO nations. This isn't exactly what we thought would happen with precision guidance. We thought that we would do this to others, others would not do this to us. So that's the first thing that we sort of learned. Next.
Henry, I've got a question.
From a student?
This is from a professor. Will you accept that?
Okay, but it's a sorry substitute. All right, go ahead.
I'll feed it to a student. Do we know who the non-state actor was? And if so, can you share that?
Well, I mean, we all read the same newspapers. I got rid of my clearances so that I could exercise the First Amendment about 10 years ago. It was, we suspect that it was some Iranian sponsored group with Iranian missiles firing, we think from Iraq. That's the best we can do, tells you a lot. And the plausible deniability as to which state was most responsible for this is part of the reason why there was no immediate response to this attack. Part of the reason. Yeah? And we'll talk about that if you're interested later. Let's go to the next slide. All right. Now, some of you might be reading Google News with some frequency, enough to know that last summer there was a war between Armenia and Azerbaijan. Early in that war, the spokesperson for the defense ministry of Azerbaijan threatened Armenia with a precision missile strike against Armenia's aging Metsamor reactor. Now, you'll notice that he said, well, will allow us to strike the Metsamor nuclear plant with precision, which could lead to a great catastrophe. It was an Israeli Laurel missile that the Azerbaijanis had, and they could hit that. And you might say, well, wait a minute. What do you need a precision missile to hit a reactor? I think we even have a slide. Let's not go to it. But by my own accounting, there were 13 airstrikes against reactors over the last, I don't know, over a 20-year period in the Middle East. You know, Israelis striking reactors in Iraq and Syria, Iranians striking Iraqi reactors, or Iraqis striking Iranian reactors. Let's see, Americans striking Iraqi reactors. I probably forgot. Saddam trying to hit an Israeli reactor, Dimona, with a rocket. So you say, well, you know, what the hell's new in this? Next slide. Well, I guess one new dimension is it isn't just states anymore that are threatening to do this. You have the Houthis, you'll see at the bottom, using what is a large Scud-like rocket to try to reach the UAE's reactor at Barakah. And the folks, Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, are perfecting this Fatah 110 to be, and have threatened to hit the military production reactor at Dimona in Israel. So you say, well, but couldn't they do that before? They didn't have the missiles. So it's something about proliferation, but there's another thing that's different. In those previous strikes, the accuracy of the missiles, there was only one. It was Saddam's Scud, was about 1 to 3 kilometers, not 1 to 3 feet or 1 to 3 meters, but 1 to 3 kilometers. Good chance it would never hit it. You had to have an air force, and you had to go through air defenses, and you had to have brave, skilled pilots to do any strikes. Not anymore. Let's go to the next slide. And there's more. If you have precision, instead of hitting a reactor, you can hit specific parts of the reactor. Why would you want to do that? Well, let's say you only wanted to scare somebody, maybe force the neighbors to get in their cars and drive away for fear that the reactor was going to get hit, or shut down all of the electrical reactors in the country. All you would need to do is have a precision strike against the parking lot. I didn't show the parking lot here. That's a very important part of the reactor system, the parking lot. I'm being sarcastic. But let's say you didn't want to, well, let's say if you did that, there wasn't much response. Well, you could show you were serious. You could knock out the power lines going in, which are necessary to feed electricity to make sure the water keeps pumping, to make sure there aren't fuel failures, to make sure that there isn't a core meltdown, make sure there's a radiological release. And you could hit that, and the diesel generator emergency system would come into play, and everyone would be safe. But boy, people would be afraid that the next missile might go after the diesel generator. Or you could go and hit out and knock out the control room or the actual reactor itself. Or if you wanted to make an even larger radiological effect, you could hit the spent fuel pond. That would produce Fukushima, or maybe in extremis, Chernobyl-like radiation patterns. You can do this if you're precise. You can do this if you're weak. You can do this if you have precise drones and missiles. Before, you couldn't. All right, let's go to the next slide. But it isn't just reactors. Petrochemical plants, natural gas depots, dams, explosive depots, where there's either explosive chemicals or actual ammo. These are all called sympathetic targets. That phrase comes from the Soviets. These are targets which, if you hit with a certain amount of energy, they release much, much more energy and do a lot of indiscriminate harm. That last, does anybody know what the image is there with the explosive depot? Does anybody, that happened last summer. Does anybody know what it was? Anybody have any memory seeing something like that on TV?
We may have an answer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Was it the port in Lebanon?
It certainly was. And now for the fun part, do any of you aspire to be policy experts? No?
Yeah, half the room.
Really?
Yeah, sure. Go.
Half the room. Do any of you ever dream about being important? Any of you? No?
Yes, yes.
Okay. By the way, the source of almost all of history's tragedies are people who want to be important. So listen up. The one thing you have to learn to do in either case is to be assertive, even if you're wrong. So I'm going to ask somebody to tell me what the range of explosive energy was that was released with this explosion in Beirut. Now, some of you might cheat, and you know how you cheat in school? Do your reading, because no one else does it. Now, if you do it, you know the answer. Does anybody have the answer? By the way, it's important to assert an answer, even if it's wrong, if you want to be a policy leader. I'm being a little sarcastic, but not by much. I want to guess. We're not going any further, and I don't want to hear from Professor Bannister. I want to hear from the student. Somebody guess what the range of the yield is in kilotons.
We have one that may want to guess. Hang on.
Okay.
Anyone on
What
Zoom,
was
go
the
ahead. If Zoom can just chime in. I guess.
1.1 kilotons.
There you go. It was somewhere between, depending on which expert you listen to. This tells you a lot about expertise. A half a kiloton to over 2 kilotons. Hiroshima was roughly 15 to 16 kilotons. So, anything that's a half a kiloton or higher, that's, as our former president would say, huge. That is not your normal explosion from anything. That is way beyond what you normally have. All right. The reason I belabor this is because you can get nuclear-like explosions with precision missiles. Now, this happened to be an accident. This was not caused by a missile, but you could cause something like that to happen with a precise missile if you knew where somebody had an ammo dump and you knew where to shoot at the center of that dump. All right, next slide. Okay, so the first takeaway is that if you use precision, you can hit sympathetic targets in specific places to produce specific graduated to massive harm. You know, if you know the petrochemical plant has a critical valve that will release toxic gas and others that will just make the plant shut down, you can choose what you want to do. So one takeaway is with precision, you can do very graduated levels of indiscriminate harm, all the way up to Chernobyl or nuclear like releases if you find the right chemical depot or ammo dump. All right, so that's takeaway one, but there's another takeaway. And that was presented not that long ago by this fellow. And if you follow Israeli news, you could read about this. This is Lieutenant General Aviv Kahavi. And what does he say? We have a problem in Israel. It's that the folks who are running Hezbollah have something like, I don't know, over 100,000 missiles that are currently not so smart, that Iran is helping them upgrade the guidance sense for so that they can be very precise. He then says every fifth house in Lebanon is either a missile warehouse or a rocket warehouse. He then says, what are we going to do? Well, we have to take a preemptive strike, a preemptive war. But we have this problem that it'll kill a lot of civilians. So what we'll do is we'll do the humane thing. We will warn them that they have to leave the place where you live before we attack. Now, when he made this statement, other Israelis said, wait a minute, Hezbollah will tell them they need to stay in place. If we go ahead and attack, a lot of innocent people are going to die. If we do this, moreover, wouldn't Iran come into the war? And how does the story end if we do this? Would the Americans be appalled at what we're doing and jeopardize all the assistance we get from them? In other words, precision strikes apparently can cause what's called catalytic war. You can escalate and drag other major powers into the war and or push you around about what you're doing. The idea that all law, it suggests that all wars may not be local anymore. They may escalate and include lots of major players that you didn't originally think about. Anyway, there's a big debate going on in Israel about how to deal with this. And it's well worth watching. I don't think enough defense analysts are looking at this debate, and it's happening right now. So it's an exciting thing to watch. Go to the next slide. But there's more. This was brought to my attention by someone at the Air War University. It's called Slaughterbots. You can find the entire show by just entering that word on your Google search engine. But I'll give you 3 short clips from the 7-minute film. This is fictional, and it's all in an attempt to ban these weapons. It was done in late 2017. Why don't we just let it talk for itself?
Just like any mobile device these days, it has cameras and sensors, and just like your phones and social media apps, it does facial recognition. Inside here is 3 grams of shaped explosive. This is how it works.
All right. We'll talk about what shaped charges are, but basically it's an explosive that vectors the energy instead of in a circular fashion into a plasma jet that drills a hole through armor, concrete, or in this case, a man's skull.
A $25 million order now buys this. Enough to kill half a city. The back.
There you go.
The nation is still recovering from yesterday's incident, which officials are describing as some kind of automated attack, which killed 11 U.S. senators at the Capitol building.
They flew in from everywhere but attacked just one side of the aisle. It was chaos. People were screaming.
You can see high windows.
Yes. All right. There's more to it, but let's just say there have been a number of discussions I've had with people in our government, and one official said, "Well, we've been looking at this. We think we would catch if someone was buying a large number of these things." I said, "Well, that's good to know." He said, I don't think he quite said that we would know. He said we could know if we started to make it something we were watching for. These actual units that are that small in your hand, I'm not sure we've got those yet, but it's not that hard to imagine something a little larger having facial recognition. Police stations and departments now deploy drones with facial recognition systems on them, and they're not that big. A shaped charge, is not that sophisticated a thing. I don't know that anyone could make it, but you could probably, if you were in the mining industry, be able to buy them. They're not that, unique. I don't think you need a shaped charge necessarily. So the next point, though, is, do you need a large attack? You'll notice in the second iteration, it was 11 senators. What if it was just one senator? Or even better yet, it didn't kill the senator, it just spooked him. I live in the District of Columbia area, and about a decade or so ago, there was a crazy fellow who had a gun, and he shot out of the rear of his trunk of his car and killed, I think, 7 people, and he kept driving around the whole city. Nobody wanted to do any shopping. The city just ground to a halt. Enough. Does anybody know what the executive branch plum book is a reference to? Has anyone heard of that before? May not have. I'm not sure.
Heads are shaking no.
A plum book is, you ever heard of a plum position? It's a good one. There is a book that identifies roughly 1,000 to 2,000 jobs in the federal government that have to be filled every time we elect a president. It's often said that if you eliminate the people who are in that plum book, you eliminate basically, the government of the United States. If you were looking at a plum book for, let's say, a country like Taiwan, I would hazard to say it wouldn't be 2,000. It would be more like 200, maybe not even that high. You get the drift. In other words, precision makes going after individuals possible. Now, we may have had an example of this recently. There is in the article, I refer to some reporting about the conclusion of the Armenian-Azerbaijan war last fall. It is now argued that the way it ended was the Russians saw that Armenia was suffering and went to them and encouraged them to fire the missiles that Russia had sold them, called Iskanders, which were very similar to the Laurels. They had about a 10-meter CEP. And somehow or another, these missiles were shot out of the sky, it's reported. It could be somebody, even a Russian, may have told the Azerbaijanis about when they were going to fire these things. But in any case, they didn't hit their target. But there was much discussion about where they were aimed at. It could have been, and we don't know, at some of the elite living in certain residences in Baku. All we know is that after that, those two missiles were fired, immediately the Azerbaijanis who were winning the war sued for peace right away. It's interesting. Inquiring minds want to know exactly what happened. I'm not sure we should get too excited about just the press report that I cite, but it's possible that it's accurate, in which case we've got a problem there that's new and you would not be able to do without precision missiles. Okay, let's go to the next slide. All right. All of this suggests that indiscriminate harm or killing a nation is back, but it's got a very different look and very different effects. And the number of players is much broader. There are things you can do. I don't want to oversell them, but you would want to have passive defenses, things that were harder than they currently are. And you can do a lot of things with these reactors. With what's called ultra performance, high performance concrete. You can put bird cages, slats essentially around critical parts of whatever you fear might be hit, because the missile would come in and explode before it hit the target. That's another passive defense. You know, there are lots of things like that you can do. Active defenses. There are some active defenses that are new. High-powered microwaves might work very well against sophisticated drones. But I think all of those things are hardly a silver bullet. Ultimately, you might also want to think about civic protection. Well, what would that consist of? We frequently hear complaints about the deep state. I always like saying, I don't worry about it so much as the shallow state. Well, what's the shallow state? Well, the shallow state is what we encounter frequently, even not only at the federal, but at various levels of government, where you're asked to do any number of inane administrative things that don't make a whole lot of sense, but you have to do them to get what you want. And the state gets very caught up in administering rather than using discretion to encourage people to support self-government. People get bitter and cynical about the state, you know. So maybe we need to be very alert to make sure that we can function even if the entire plum book gets targeted. And that goes not only for the United States, but other states as well. It may be that despite everyone's disparaging comments about the dysfunction of democracy, that civic education and self-government may be our ultimate protection against these kinds of threats. Now, that's a pretty wild argument, but this is a pretty wild threat. And I throw this out to kick off what I hope is some question and discussion.